I was wondering, with this recent pushback against cricket etiquette craziness and the Commonwealth Games signal the end of conquerors deciding Australia's future? Or will we, as Australians, feel unable to change our future because of the weight of the conquerors' legacy of high inflation and unaffordable housing?
James, Heappey, well, there you go. Conquerors' legacy and all sorts of loaded topics there for you to take on.
A lot on that question. So the cricket, I have been crying all day that the sun did not shine in Manchester when we needed it most. I'm not quite sure what our legacy is over the Commonwealth Games. I mean, it's a great shame that, for whatever reason, Victoria's decided not to host them. The games in Birmingham and Gold Coast, I think, were regarded as a success, but that's very much your choice. But I reflect on a relationship between the UK and Australia that is, yes, rivalrous, but always one that is based on deep and abiding friendship. And the purpose of my visit to your country and this part of the world this week is because there's a challenge to our shared values, and whatever there is in our past that may or may not, Rachel, cause you some concern, there is a lot in our future about which we must stand together, and I'm confident that our countries will do so.
It's an interesting point about the past, but just returning to the Commonwealth Games theme, you say whatever the reasons are cost, and I suppose a view that perhaps the Games are declining in the way that people view them. Do you acknowledge that the cost is a huge issue and, well, if they're a good idea, perhaps the UK could pay for them?
The bit I'm not tracking is that when we hosted them, they were a good thing. We sort of put $1.5 billion into the Birmingham economy. The same when they're in Glasgow, but they're not our games. I mean, if they're our games, we'd probably have banned swimming a long time ago because we'd be top of the medals table.
Fair enough.
But I think if that's the premise of the question, then that feels odd because they're the Commonwealth Games.
Joy?
Oh, okay. So I don't know if it's our games. When you say it's our games, my thought is that, you know, the original concept of the Commonwealth Games is the Empire Games. So if you look at that word, empire, that spells king, yes. So how does someone achieve an empire? They conquer it.
Right.
So and then these games are at the pleasure of the king, and to celebrate the king, using all the conquered countries to compete against each other.
So I mean, it's interesting, but the Commonwealth has countries in it now that were never part of the British Empire. Togo. I was in Togo a couple of months ago. They joined the Commonwealth because they want to be part of a club of nations bound by friendship and shared values. And nobody is compelled to send a team to the Commonwealth Games. People do because they enjoy the opportunity to compete internationally in the games that are labelled invariably the friendly games. Yeah,
it has certainly evolved. Rachel, how do you view what we've seen in the last week?
Well, I think there's nothing better than beating the British at their own game, frankly. We do enjoy that here, and we do it repeatedly at the Commonwealth Games. But I think that, you know, it is a great shame to not have the Games, because obviously there's those athletes who dedicate so much of their lives to competing, and that's a great loss. But the expense at this time in our country is significant. And, you know, I mean, spending money on affordable housing is such an important thing to do. So certainly in the Territory where I'm from, we'd love a couple of $1 billion spent on social and affordable housing. So I can see the reasoning behind it.
But Patrick Gorman, it brings us to the point, why bid for it in the first place, right?
Well, Joy, I represent Perth in the Federal Parliament. Kate's my next door neighbour. Perth hosted the then Empire Games back in 1962. And one of the reasons that countries do bid for these is they leave an amazing infrastructure legacy. I've got Beatty Park and the Wacker and other assets in my electorate that are still used to this day. But to the deeper question about our relationship with the Commonwealth and the United Kingdom, that relationship's evolving. It has never been set at a point in time. And when it then gets to the question of, right now there's probably a little bit of tension in the relationship. Some of that's because Australia's better at the cricket. Some of that tension is because there's been a really difficult decision made by the Victorian government to pull out of hosting the Commonwealth Games.
You call it difficult. Was it the wrong decision?
Oh, look, these are decisions for states.
How do you view it?
The states bid for these.
Yeah.
That they make the decision. That's our federated structure. If they make the decision to bid and they make the decision to pull out, I respect that. They're difficult decisions, and everyone around the world is making, in leadership roles, is making really difficult decisions right now.
Is that fair enough, Barnaby?
No, it's not. First thing is, we have to ask the question why there was nothing in the Commonwealth budget about supporting the Commonwealth Games in Victoria. Maybe, surely they weren't having little talks about it beforehand. No one would ever suggest that, would they? Brisbane cost $1.2 billion. In Birmingham, it was 1.6, and this one's 6 and 7.
Sure, there has been inflation, perhaps not to that
not
level.
that much, PK, for God's sake. I mean,
no, perhaps
so it's
not.
either,
But things do cost more, don't they?
Atrocious accounting by the government or atrocious management by the state Labor government. It's one or the other, and just the way they did it. Why didn't they get on the phone to Chris Minns beforehand, or to Anastasia Palaszczuk beforehand, and say, look, I'm in a bit of a bind here. I've got a complete botch up. Do you mind doing a couple of events in Brisbane?
It doesn't sound like they wanted it.
Yeah, it sounded like they were taking us for a little bit of a ride, to be quite frank. And now Australia looks like a bit of a laughing stock because we've just said we're going to do it, now we're not going to do it, and it also reflects very badly on us because they say, well, the Aussies, who knows? Just don't take them too seriously.
So do you think that the Prime Minister should step in and pay for it?
Yeah, well, something should have happened earlier than this because the ramifications flow back to the whole of the nation.
But now should he step in and pay for them?
He certainly should be working out. He should be calling all the premiers in and say, can we work this out? Can we get something up and running? We've got Labor in every state on the mainland. Surely we can work together and make this botch up work so that we keep a little bit of dignity because, we've won the Ashes, we're up here, and then we blow up the Commonwealth Games and go right back down here again.
And we're going to win the Women's World Cup. Kate?
The thing that really worries me is how can we get it so wrong? How can the estimate of the cost go, more than double? And when you look at some of the costs that weren't included in the original estimate, it really doesn't fill you with faith about government's ability to predict the costs of all sorts of other things as well. So that's what worries me, is we actually need to make sure that our public service is able to correctly estimate these things and decisions are made based on facts, not what's on politically palatable at the time.
OK, so just let me ask this then. Do you agree with Barnaby Joyce that the Prime Minister should be bringing up in all of the premiers to resolve this?
Well, I don't actually think it's up to the Commonwealth Government. It is something that the states, independently bid for, and ultimately, I think it's on Victoria to have made the decision in the first place and then have to decide how to deal with it now. It would be nice if we could find a solution because I think, unfortunately, it's the athletes who've been looking forward to this who end up disappointed.
And this gets us.